Welcome to our second webinar. Today we are going to have two speakers from Cyprus and from Democritus University. So we have the pleasure to have two not invited speakers, but two speakers that are part of the team of Breathing Team. And I think it will be very interesting to see their presentations, since they are going to present communications targeting some of the awareness that we intend to give to stakeholders, to other colleagues, to other higher education institutions regarding air quality and health issues and well-being. And welcome everyone. And I'm going to pass the word to Edna, that is going to introduce the first speaker. Edna, please.
Okay, thank you very much. And welcome to you all to this second webinar then. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Souzana Achilleos. Yes, she is an assistant professor in environmental health at the University of Nicosia Medical School. Dr. Achilleos holds a BSc degree in chemistry from the National and Kapodistrian University in Athens, Greece. She has a Master's of Science in Environmental Health from the Cyprus International Institute for the Environment and Public Health in association with the Harvard School of Public Health. And she has a Doctor of Science degree in Environmental Health from Harvard University in Boston, Massachusetts. Souzana's research interests include exposure assessment, environmental epidemiology, and public health, and particularly the investigation of sources, fate and transport, and effects of air pollution, including dust storms, on human health. Her presentation today, the title is Mitigating the Health Effects of Desert Dust Storms Using Exposure Reduction Approaches, Lessons Learned from the LIFE-MEDEA Public Health Intervention Study. Yes, so please welcome Souzana, and you can actually start. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to present an overview and some results of a bigger study, the MEDEA study, which was another European study, which also combines really well with the purpose and of the breath-in. So maybe we can use some of those outcomes and learn things that we learned. But also, you know, it goes under the overall goal of breathing for a more better indoor air quality, maybe not as sustainable as the goal of our project, but aligns very well. So MEDEA stands for Mitigating the Health Effects of Desert Dust Storms Using Exposure Reduction Approaches. And the overall goal of this study was basically to assess the feasibility and effectiveness of intervention measures, and actually intervention measures that could be used regularly in dust storms. So we wanted to see that whether they're basically effective and reduce the exposure to dust storms, but also it was something that could be adopted and followed by the general population. This study was based in three places in the Eastern Mediterranean region, in Cyprus, Crete in Greece, and Israel. And it started in September 2017. It was a 4-year study, but due to COVID pandemic, it got an extension for end of 2022. The coordinated beneficiary was the University of Cyprus in Cyprus, and then different universities and research centers and other organizations, including governmental stakeholders, were involved in this project. So why we study this in this area? So here you can see an overall diagram of the African dust load in terms of PM10 levels. where basically the white is land and blue is the Mediterranean Sea. But you see the circle basically represents the dust intensity in different regions. So we see that basically there is a gradient that countries in the more south and east part of Europe, they experience more frequent but also more intense dust storms that are coming from Africa. But countries like Cyprus or Crete, they also experience dust storms from the Arabian Peninsula. Here are some pictures actually that they were taken some time ago from these participate countries. So here in the left, you see a picture from Crete, the port. And on the right top, it's the airport in Cyprus, and below a picture from Israel during dust storms. So during especially the heavy, incidents, and some of my colleagues here in Cyprus that we have been experiencing dust events over the last few days. There's a high load of particles in the air. Sometimes affects, of course, visibility, but also creates different symptoms. And what was also observed, and why this study was conducted, is because that even under these conditions, many people, they were following doing regular activities, spending time outdoors. I see here there were some of them were going to the beach. So it looked that for some people it was not a concern. But we know even desert dust is relatively natural source of particles. It indeed has different health effects. So there are different studies that conducted, and they see mainly effects, of course, the respiratory and the cardiovascular system, but also some evidence shows that also it affects the reproductive organs, it causes skin allergies and different symptoms. And one reason, of course, is that we have high load of particles during dust. And as you can see here, particles are so small, especially in terms of PM10 or PM2.5, which are at least 1/5 of the size of a human hair. And besides their mass, of course, it's not well documented, but the components that carries with them, it may be different during dust storms, especially if they pass by different industrialized countries. So based on this need, this is where this study came from. And our population that was included children with asthma from primary schools, 6 to 11 years old. And these were recruited from both Cyprus and Greece. And also adults with atrial fibrillation that they already have a pacemaker. And these were recruited from all 3 countries. And then we assigned this population into 3 intervention groups. We had the control group, which basically people were just following, business, doing their business as usual, and we're just assessing them. The outdoor intervention, and then the combined intervention. The outdoor intervention, meaning that we're trying to reduce their exposure to dust particles. The outdoor exposure during dust storms. So basically, these included guidelines like limit your time outside and limit any outdoor physical activity when there is a dust. And the combined intervention, besides the outdoor reduction, also included indoor reduction to exposure to dust. And this was achieved by having an air purifier, as you see here in this picture, that is using a 4-stage purifier with a HEPA filter, which is a high efficiency particulate filter. And also, we try to reduce the penetration from outdoor sources, especially in some old houses or schools that they had like big cracks and so on. So for children with asthma, we follow these interventions in both their homes and also at their schools. So the control group was not getting any alerts from our group in terms when there is a dust storm. but both the outdoor and the combined intervention group was getting our dust alerts and also notifications and guidelines of what they should be doing. This is a diagram basically of just outlines the study. So in the next few slides, I'm gonna focus on the children with asthma intervention and the results. Just be aware of the time. So basically we have notification in terms of dust storms when there was a dust storm coming. These were getting information from our meteorological departments based on forecasting, but also from air quality monitoring that was done in the different countries. And these alerts for a dust storm, when there's a dust storm coming and main intensity, was notified to both the parents of the children, but also the school teachers. And it was notified through emails, text messages, but also through our mobile app notification that it was designed. And during this time, we assessed 3 different things. One is we assessed the air quality. So we assessed simultaneously indoor and outdoor levels of PM2.5 and PM10 in both households and classrooms of these asthmatic children. We used a set inside and outside that included 2 impactors. Basically, impactors are these instruments that you can see here that collects particles on filters. And then they can be analyzed and estimate the mass concentration, but also we use them for speciation analysis to see what are the elements and the concentrations of different elements in the filters. And in addition to this, I have to say that we used these tools in a sample of the participants because of logistics, basically. It needs a lot of hands in place, but also in terms of financial contribution. To expand a little bit about and have data for as many premises as possible, we also included some local sensors, such as the alpha-sense sensors that many of you guys have used before. Basically, we got almost, I think it runs every 1.2 seconds. It gets measurements for both PM2.5 and PM10. So with this, we were able to at least get some profiles during the day, what are when we had some peaks and when we had some lowers, and maybe make some comparisons across the premises. Of course, the data we get from the impactors, it's a more accurate PM measurements, and that's why, of course, it was used. In terms of clinical data, basically we assess, we had primary outcomes, but also secondary outcomes that they were used. So we assessed these children at baseline and then at every month throughout the high dust season, which is basically in the spring. The primary outcome, it was asthma control test, and this was done through telephone. Basically, these questionnaires assess daytime and nighttime respiratory symptoms. And then we also assess other secondary outcomes through questionnaires in terms of medication use or if there were any unscheduled visits because of asthma symptoms. We also did some tests like lung function and lung inflammation. And these were assessed 3 times during the dust seasons, a baseline, mid, and end of high. And at the end of the season, we also did a skin test. And lastly, we also assessed their physical activity and also the time they were spent indoors versus outdoors. And with that, we had children wearing a smartwatch, of course, after getting the consent of the parents. And this was, monitoring their basically the steps that they were doing every day, but also there was a GPS, so we could at least have a rough estimate how much time they were spending inside, how much time they were spending outside at their school, and also for time outside school. So at the end, from both two countries, we had 182 children, and these were from Cyprus and Crete. And these included 59 children in the control group, 56 in the outdoor intervention group, and 67 from the combined intervention group. Just for you to note that when we look at baseline demographic and clinical characteristics were more or less similar between the three intervention groups, at least at baseline. So one thing that we first assess is whether there was any compliance in terms of spending time inside and reduced physical activity when we have dust storms. So here's a diagram that basically compares the control group and the other intervention groups where they were supposed to reduce their outdoor exposure. So here the graphs show on average the minutes that they were spending outside and steps outside the classroom of their home for non-dust days in blue and dust days in orange. So for the control group, we saw that there was not much difference or not significant difference. But for the intervention group, we saw that both minutes and steps outside were reduced. So basically that shows that in terms of compliance, the children will be able to, follow these guidelines. Just a note, not shown here, but we also observed that compliance to these recommendations were greatest after school hours. Now, in terms of indoor air quality, again, here basically when we compare the control outdoor and full or the combined intervention, we found that basically there was a reduction in the indoor concentrations levels of both PM2.5 and PM10 for the combined intervention, where they're using the air cleaner. And that reduction, well, we saw both during dust and non-dust days, but also we saw a reduction in terms of infiltration, meaning the particles coming from outside inside. This is the results in a more detailed manner, or detailed tables. But basically, the table 5 looks at the relationship between indoor PM2.5 and PM10 in regards to the intervention group, whether it was a school or a house, and whether we have dust versus non-dust. And basically, we saw that the full intervention experience 0.5 up to 0.6 times the PM levels rather than no intervention. The school had school premises had higher indoor PM10 levels, and as expected during dust storms, the indoor PM levels was also high. In the table 6 below, we see not the indoor PM levels, but basically we see the indoor to outdoor ratio and the infiltration rate that it was estimated based on some model, but basically based on some chemical components of PM. But basically what we observe is that the infiltration for the combined intervention was less than the controls groups. And schools had higher infiltrations, but also dust storms for PM10 also had some infiltration of 0.7 times versus non-dust. So basically, the overall outcome of this or conclusion is that the use of these air cleaners and minimizing the air exchange by closing windows and doors and sealing all the possible cracks that could have been possible, especially during dust events, could significantly reduce the indoor exposure to particles. And some of these interventions were in place for both dust and non-dust days, and we saw differences in both scenarios. Now, in terms of the health benefits in this cohort, so in terms of changing any asthma symptoms, so here we see change in the ACT score based on the questionnaire. And then we saw on baseline Math 1, Math 2, and Math 3. Blue is controls, yellow outdoor the intervention, and green is the combined intervention. So there has been an improvement in their asthma questionnaire score, and it was much more in terms of the combined intervention than the control, which was more worsening the symptoms. In terms of the secondary outcomes, so here we have change in the frequency with any asthma medication. So we saw improvement in terms of any asthma medication for the combined intervention, but also improvement in terms of unscheduled clinical visits. It was much more for the combined intervention. The FEV1, the lung function, we also show improvement. But for the forced vital capacity and the FeNO tests for lung function, lung inflammation, there was not any significant differences. So from all the, the lessons learned, let's say, we show that they're both efficient but also feasible, these measures, and can be used in these countries, but also in other countries, but also not during dust storm, but also maybe during other events. So we're able at the end of the study for all the participating countries to have a standardization in terms of meteorological models for forecasting. We had some videos that they can be played in terms of, the guidelines, and this can be used at schools or any other settings. Any leaflets and infographics were used to educate the people. Also, the creation of an application that basically shows the alerts of dust storms and also guidelines for people. So different dissemination, but also communication in terms of with the public, and awareness also with the school personnel and the school nurses and health professionals. So thank you. I hope this also encourages our, ongoing and starting our project, and, move this one step forward to go into the more sustainable improvements of indoor air quality.
Thank you, Souzana, for your intervention. I will place the time for discussion at the end of the two participants. So I will give the words again to Edna, that is going to present the next speaker. Edna, please.
Okay, so thank you, Cristina. I would like to invite then our next speaker, which is Dr. Anastasia Pascalido. So Anastasia is an associate professor in meteorology and atmospheric pollution at the Democritus University of Thrace in Greece. She's the vice head of the Department of Forestry and Management of the Environment and National Resources, and she's also a member of the Quality Assurance Committee of DUF. Anastasia Pascalido teaches courses in meteorology, atmospheric pollution, and climate change at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. Her research interests include urban meteorology, bioclimatology, atmospheric pollution, environmental epidemiology, climate change, and its impact on the natural environment and public health. She has more than 100 publications in peer-reviewed journals, conference proceedings, and book chapters. She has participated in numerous national and European research projects as PI or team leader. She's the author of 2 books, Climate Change, Physics of the Atmospheric Environment. And as of 2020, she's the associate editor in the scientific journal Science of the Total Environment. Anastasia's title, her presentation today, is The Thermal Stress and Public Health in Mediterranean Environments, Current Trends and Future Projections. So, Anastasia, the floor is yours. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry about that. So I was thanking you, Edna, for the introduction and wishing everyone a good afternoon. So I guess it's my turn to take this opportunity to welcome everyone in this series of webinars in the context of the Breathing Project. So yes, today I am going to be discussing thermal stress and public health in Thessaloniki. And for the next 20 minutes or so, I will be showing you current trends and future projections in this specific urban environment. Is it moving? Is it changing the slide?
Yes, Anastasia, yes.
Okay, yes, I think now it works.
Yes.
Okay, so as an introduction, I would like to give you some first preliminary remarks. I would like to remind you that extreme temperatures, like both high and low temperatures, are known for their adverse impact on public health. And by that, we mainly refer to mortality and morbidity due to respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. So as this is a fact, numerous epidemiological studies are conducted throughout the world, and one of their major steps is the attempt to create the so-called response exposure curve. This is a curve, this is a relationship, a graph, which actually shows how mortality risk increases as temperature increase or decreases. It's not a linear relationship. In fact, it has a U, V, J or inverse J shape. And an important thing that is derived by this curve is that the adverse impact of heat waves manifests shortly after exposure, which means that every time people are exposed to extremely high temperatures, the mortality risk increases. And this can be seen at the day of exposure, or let's say 1 or 2 days later. On the other hand, when we are dealing with cold spells, I mean low temperatures, there a lag can be observed, which means that the adverse effect is observed like a week or 10 days later. Another important thing in this curve, in the exposure response curve, is the temperature threshold point, which is some specific temperature or range of temperatures that are considered to be the optimum. In a way, it is the comfort zone, which means that the mortality risk is 0. But as we move away from this point towards higher or lower temperatures, mortality risk increases sharply. For that, let me open a parenthesis here and refer to some projects we had with Edna like 10 years ago. Edna, I think that was in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So there we performed such an epidemiological study for the Cypriot population, and we found that the temperature threshold lies somewhere around 34 degrees Celsius. However,
If we move to the
Anastasia,
north,
excuse me, you are in the second?
yes, yes,
okay,
I'm still in
okay.
the second.
I
Yes,
do
yes.
apologize.
No worries. Okay, so I was saying that in Cyprus, the temperature threshold is in 33.7 degrees Celsius. But if we move towards the north, if we go to higher latitudes, say in Scandinavia, there we can observe that the temperature threshold lies somewhere around 25 degrees Celsius. And this actually implies the ability of the population to adapt to local climate. So in a way, this temperature threshold is region-specific. Though apart from region-specific, it is also population-specific. Because if we examine the whole population, there we will find that there are certain subgroups that are most vulnerable. And these are mainly the children and the elderly, and the people who have already compromised health and they are receiving some medication. So these are all well-known facts. But in our case, in the Mediterranean region, these are facts of specific importance. And this is because our region is considered to be a climate change hotspot. This means that in the future, we are going to be suffering heat waves that will have bigger frequency, intensity, and longitude. So we will be experiencing more heat waves during the year. They are going to be last more, like 1 or 2 weeks, and the temperatures that will characterize this phenomena will be higher. For this reason, we are conducting health impact assessment studies in order to quantify the health burden that is expected to result in the future from higher temperatures. In these studies, we take account of the exposure response curves that I described to you earlier, and we try to project them in the future by using different climate change scenarios. However, most of these studies, the health impact assessment studies, do not take adaptation in account because it is known that the human body can adapt to local climate. And there are certain drivers for doing so. These can be physiological, behavioral, cultural, technological, and so forth. So if we do not take account of these drivers of adaptation, then it means that we will end up with substantial overestimations in our results. Also, there are certain socioeconomic factors that into account. Again, we will end up overestimating the future heat-related mortality. So, to overcome this kind of shortcomings, we developed a health impact assessment model for Thessaloniki in order to measure the cardiorespiratory mortality, which is attributed to increased temperatures. And for that, we used different climate change scenarios derived from the coupled model intercomparison project, phase 6. So we used a series of climate change scenarios. Some of them were very pessimistic, some other very optimistic, etc. Also, we tried to put adaptation into game, and specifically, we focused on technological adaptation, that is, through the use of air conditioning. However, there were very many tricky findings there. So there has been a trade-off between averted heat mortality and increased air pollution mortality, but I'm going to explain more about this later on while showing my results. Here you can see the data set we used for this study. So like I said, we focused in Thessaloniki, which is the second largest city of Greece, with a population of around 800,000. And about 21% of it is considered to be elderly. That is, they have an age of 16 years and above. The meteorological data we used were daily values of surface maximum and minimum temperature in degrees Celsius and relative humidity The data set was obtained from the Macedonia International Airport of Thessaloniki, and it covered the time period between 1999 and 2012. This was a very important period for us, as it was used as the baseline period, because some years ago, we performed an epidemiological analysis there in the context of some other previous project. So we had the opportunity to create the exposure response curve, and this was used as the basis for this new study, for this new research work I'm presenting today. Regarding our projections and our assumptions, like I said, we derived different climate change scenarios from the specific project. Some of them were very pessimistic, some others were very optimistic. However, we also tried to take into account the evolution of population in the years to come. So we used different projections about the expansion or shrinking of population, taking into account different pathways like sustainable or fragmented world pathways, or somewhere in the middle of the road pathways. In fact, this implies that we use different socioeconomical data and assumptions, as well as fertility rates, death rates, etc., etc. To translate our results into heat-related mortality estimations, we used the well-known Knowlton methodology that it was introduced back in 2007. And as a means of adaptation, we used technological adaptation through the use of air conditioning. So our assumption has been that in the future, people will have to cope with higher temperatures, so they will turn into using air conditioning more and more. But inevitably, this means that the excess use of air conditioning will mean an excess in energy demand. And somehow this demand has to be covered. So we used two different scenarios for that. The first one used brown coal, lignite, I mean, and the second one was natural gas. However, these are fossil fuels, and every time we burn them, dangerous pollutants are emitted and introduced into the atmosphere. And I'm referring to fine particles, to sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, etc. So, every time we burn fossil fuels, we pollute our atmosphere. So, there is a burden in public health just because of that, because we breathe air that is of low quality. So this we also took into account, and we translated these emissions into the health burden using the intake fraction approach. For all our estimations, we used Analytica Professional Edition, and our models were run with 1,000 iterations each. Here you can see the conceptual diagram of this study. So you can see where we started from and where we headed to. And the intermediate steps we took, like the assumptions we made about the changes in the climate, in the population, as well as the evolution of adaptation in our population. So to our results, here you can see 4 panels, and each one is describing the evolution of annual mortality due to heat effects in Thessaloniki for the years to come, and per scenario. In the last panel, you can see that at the end of this century, and according to the worst case scenario, 8.5 that is, we are expecting to have around 400 more deaths per year because of exposure to high temperatures. These are pretty big numbers. Just remember that Thessaloniki has a population of 800,000. So an extra 400 people dying every year because of heat. However, these might be overestimations because we did not, so up to here, to this point, take into account adaptation. So the next step was try to measure adaptation. And for that, we used a technological driver, that is the use of air conditioning. And here you can see the comparison of the two scenarios. The scenario of materializing adaptation through the lignite burning in order to produce the necessary power. And the second scenario is through natural gas. What is very impressive here is that all the profits gained by technological adaptation when we use lignite are cancelled out because of the extra mortality that is created as people breathe worse air. So in a way, there is some kind of trade-off in this case. On the other hand, when we're using the natural gas approach, you can see that the situation is much more improved. And there is substantial adaptation, and lives are saved just because of that. So to conclude with, we have found that climate change in Thessaloniki is expected to result in increased heat-related mortality in the years to come. And this is especially true for the worst-case scenarios, like the one I showed you earlier. The good news is that there is room for adaptation. As in our case, we explored the potential of technological adaptation. Nevertheless, it appeared that this does not come at no cost, as we try to protect our lives by performing, by materializing technological adaptation. At the same time, we produce mortality because people breathe polluted air. So this actually highlights the importance of choosing the most appropriate way of materializing this adaptation. And by that, I mainly refer to turning away from the burning of lignite and switching to more sustainable and environmental friendly options. So these are all questions that future studies have to answer. And they need actually to address the limits and trade-offs of the current adaptation measures and show us the pathway in order for a better and sustainable and healthier future. I think I'm gonna put an end here, and maybe we could start the questions and discussion session, Cristina, so we can have the chance.
Yes,
to listen
of
to
course,
people.
Anastasia. Thank you for our presentation.
Thank
Edna
you.
is going to moderate this part of our webinar, the discussion. Feel free to put your hand in the air, so to speak. Edna, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Anastasia. So I think we do have some time for questions. If you could then maybe raise your hand, and then you could unmute yourself and ask your question to either Anastasia or to Souzana. Yeah.
Well, as usual, I have one question to Anastasia. Anastasia, did your model took into consideration only the temperature or the number of consecutive days above the 35-degree level that I think that you used as the threshold, or the number of heat waves or the
Yes,
duration?
yes, we performed the lag analysis. So yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, okay. And the results, I think you showed in somewhere in your presentation that there were no significant results until more or less 2040.
Yes, yes, it's the evolution of the
So,
annual mortality.
okay, so the most relevant will be by the end of this century.
Exactly. Mhm.
Okay, so therefore I understand why you conclude that we had time to adapt or to mitigate the consequences of the risings of the temperature in the area, in the region of Thessaloniki.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Okay.
also let me put one more parameter in the question. So you see, Thessaloniki does not have a very harsh climate in terms of heat waves. So in a way, these numbers here might seem low, but in fact they are not so low because we are discussing about a city with
Yeah.
mild summers. So that also should be taken into account when trying to translate the magnitude of the results.
And also maybe the amount of elderly people among the population as well.
Exactly.
This might also have some impact in the study.
Exactly.
Did you made any prediction of how many elder people might you have in a few decades from now?
Yes, that was introduced in our model through the projections of the population I showed earlier. It's actually the UN projections that we used
Okay.
for the different scenarios, the good one and bad, depending on the fertility levels, how the economy will evolve, how the society will be shaping itself, and so forth.
The only thing that I think it is not easy to estimate is that among those people, how many will have already diseases and
Yes.
therefore are subject to major impacts regarding these heat waves.
Yeah,
This
these
is the most.
these are all confounders in the study. Yes, very good point, that one. Yeah.
Okay, okay. This is very interesting indeed, and it may be interesting to replicate these results. Did you made any comparisons with the previous temperatures that you had and the previous study that you had made in Thessaloniki with this one?
That was the baseline study, which referred to the current situation. It used the data from the past in order to create the exposure response curve. But here in this study, we used the previous one to take it one step further and try to project it for the future.
Yes, yes.
So the comparison is actually these bars here. But you compare current situation, yes, with what's going to happen in the decades to come.
Yes, 2039, 40, 59. Okay, until the end of the century. Okay. Yes.
Do we have any other questions?
I do not have a question. I just wanted to point out how relevant were the results that Souzana showed us earlier. Because the last few days we've been experiencing a dust storm here in Greece from the deserts of northern Africa. So I'm happy that our students are here now and are listening to this so they can understand a little bit more about the possible adverse impact of this dust that we are breathing all these last few days. So Souzana, congratulations. Very interesting.
Yes, very interesting indeed. 2 weeks ago, we had the same problem here in Tomar, and we are in the middle of the country, more or less located in the middle of the country. So we are now experience more and more the problems related with these dust storms. And I invite you all to be present on the third webinar that is going to take place on the 24th of April. And we are going to have a speaker, a PhD student from Lisbon University, that is going to speak precisely about the impacts that we are now having in the southern region of the country, here in Portugal, related with these dust storms, because indeed everything went orange, like the images that Souzana showed us. And it is becoming increasingly a problem here also in Portugal. So the trade winds are also having the changes in trade winds are also having here a huge impact. Thank you, Souzana, for your contribution to this webinar. Yes.
We also learned from this is that it's not only the outdoor, levels that are affected, but also the indoor. So
yes,
it's very important. Just because the dust is outside doesn't mean that. Actually, we saw that
most
of the indoor air pollution is coming from outside, in general. So it's very important to also reduce and interventions inside the house, where of course we spend most of our times indoors. So
yes. So now we have two impacts to study: the forest fires, unfortunately, because the season is going to it's approaching, and now these dusts. Yes.
And I wanted, Souzana, maybe another thing that we actually should look into and you should consider is actually the increase in temperatures. Yeah, so we stay longer periods indoors, but in some cases, not all the houses, they do have the technology like the air conditioners or other things in order for them to be able to cope with that. But anyway.
Anastasia, is there any legislation now in Greece in order for the new houses to have solar panels installed to reduce the energy production based upon the other sources, non-renewable?
People are being given incentives to switch to solar panels and photovoltaics, etc. And many, a lot do so. However, in some cases, the initial investment is high. So this is something that keeps people back from switching to that more sustainable option. So I guess there has to be found some better balance between the incentives and how people can actually take advantage of them in their within their budget.
Yes, here in Portugal we have incentives for that, but now the new constructions must have solar panels. That's why I'm asking. And this is, I think, a good path in order to become a greener country. Yeah. I saw a lot of solar panels also in Cyprus. This is mandatory in Cyprus or not?
I think there are also
Edna?
incentives, but Souzana or Edna are more.
Yeah.
I think Loizos could also answer. Loizos, if you know.
Yes, actually, it is mandatory for new buildings to have solar panels, and it is mandatory at least 25% of the building to be from renewable energy. And now the legislation is changing, and they are updating the legislation so that more percentage of this energy comes from basically solar panels.
Yes, this is good. This is very good indeed. And I also noticed that the solar panels in the majority of the cases are linked to heat also the water. That is not
Yes.
that customary, but
that is a second part of the legislation. One is the electrical energy, and the other part is the heating of water. That is also mandatory for residential homes only.
Okay. Okay.
So each flat has to have a certain amount of solar panels for heating water and solar photovoltaics for producing renewable energy.
Yes, I noticed that. I noticed that when I went to Cyprus. So here we began more or less people before everyone talked about reducing the emissions. Some people bought one solar panel for heating water or warming the houses with that heated water. And now the legislation is also changing, like I told you, but I do not know if it encompasses the heating of the water and only the solar panels to produce energy. Rui, I do not know if you are within this subject. Do you know if it is also mandatory for warming the water or only for producing energy? Electricity in new buildings?
Hi, I think it's both.
Both? Okay.
Nowadays, I think it's both. Yes, yes.
Okay.
When you put a panel, you must install also the other one.
Okay. Okay. So Edna, I give the word back to
Is
you.
there any other questions? Anyone would like to? I have one, Iris. Please, you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It was both of the presentations were very interesting. I was just wondering, because there's mortality because of air pollution and mortality because of increasing heat, is it the same groups of people who are their mortality is affected, or are there differences in these groups that their mortality increases?
In essence, it's the same people that are mostly vulnerable. It's the elderly and pregnant women and children, because they have the diminished ability of thermal regulation, but also they are more vulnerable to respiratory and cardiovascular disease. So the short answer is yes.
So it's the same, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering if maybe one factor would increase maybe more people who are older and another factor would increase all age groups equally.
In fact, air pollution and thermal stress have a synergistic impact on public health. So in a way, yes, it's the same groups of populations that are being adversely affected.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else who would like, is there any other question to either Anastasia or Souzana? No? So I would like then to thank Souzana and Anastasia for your very enlightening, very interesting presentation. Yes. And we hope that you can join us all of you can join us for our third webinar. Yeah. So Cristina, I give it back to you then.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for being present today. I hope we can meet again, like Edna told you, on the 24th. And until then, breathe in. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Breathe in.
Thank you.
Bye.